Hi everyone, John here from All Miniatures Great and Small, and today we're going to be looking at World of Tanks, the miniatures game from Gale Force 9. This, of course, is a miniatures board game based on the World of Tanks video game property. So I'd like to make a video that kind of goes over a simple how to play and what you might expect in a game of World of Tanks miniatures game. I know this video or this game is going to appeal to two different kinds of people. One of them would be the miniatures or board gaming players out there, and the other is going to be the folks who play the video game World of Tanks and maybe have never played a board game before, or at least a board game like this. So I wanted to make a video for all the folks to kind of get an idea of what they're getting into with World of Tanks, the miniatures game. So let's go ahead and get started. Here are the contents of the game, everything we get in the starter box. If you watch my unboxing, this stuff will look familiar to you. Now I've had a little bit of time, I've gotten a few games under my belt, so I better understand what everything does. I was a player of the original version of this, Tanks, that Gale Force 9 produced a few years back. And this game is the same game engine. It's been tweaked, but it's essentially the same thing. But it's been a long time, so now I have a better understanding and can give you an idea of what to expect. So in the game, you've got this stuff. We'll explain what all the contents do. Obviously, you have your tanks. The starter set comes with British Cromwell, a T-34 Soviet, American Sherman, and a German Panzer IV. Next we have the unit cards, and again these are very nice quality glossy unit cards, one for each tank. So that one's backwards, there we go. Alright, so what we have on these unit cards, we've got the firepower, which is the number of dice you throw. Survivability is the defensive capability of the tank, how many dice you get there. Mobility is the maximum number of times the tank can move using the movement arrow, which we'll take a look at in a moment. And initiative is the kind of the sequence that the tanks move in the movement phase and the shooting phase, so it determines whether you move first or shoot first or whatnot. You also have a number of hit points for your tank, 4 in the case of this T-34, and then you have the crew, commander slash gunner, radio operator, driver, loader, and that's important to know because of upgrades. You can only upgrade so many crew members. You have the cost of the tank, so the T-34 costs 40. It's a medium tank. I guess that's tier 5 in the game. And that's it. On the back side, you have any special rules that the tanks might have. This is when shooting, this tank may re-roll a blank attack die. So that's a pretty handy capability. So each tank has one or more special rules on the back. Okay, so that's a look at the unit cards, again one matching each tank model that came in the game. Then we have the upgrade cards. On this side we have the cost of the card, and then on the flip side we have all the information about the card. So for example, this card is called Gun Rammer. It is an equipment card, and it costs 2 points. And it gives +1 to your initiative during the shooting phase. So it kind of bumps you up in the shooting order potentially. This symbol here in the top right hand corner means any nation can use it, so it's not specific to a particular nation or tank. Something like the enhanced gun laying drive. When stationary or while having a movement token of 1, this tank gains +2 to the initiative in the shooting phase. So that costs 2 points as well, and anyone can take it. There's also cards that are specific to nations. So here's an example. This 100 octane gasoline is a consumable, but only the Germans, Americans, and British can use it. So sorry, Soviet players. Discard to use, and you get +2 to your initiative during the movement phase. Now, a lot of these, well, all of them that we've looked at so far correspond to upgrades in the video game, which is kind of cool. This one is Soviet only, costs 1 point. Removed speed governor. So it's equipment. At the start of the movement phase, this tank may suffer 1 damage to gain +3 initiative until the end of the phase. So you can crank the the engine, take some damage, but it really lets you pump up that initiative. Now, as we talk about this game, I'm probably going to mention X-Wing quite a bit, because this game and its predecessor seems to owe a lot to the X-Wing as far as design space goes. And it's up to you to determine whether that's good or bad. I happen to like X-Wing, so I think that's a good system if you're going to have something similar to base off of. And I think tanks works particularly well for that. Alright, so an upgrade cards is one of those things that if you play X-Wing, you're very familiar with. Then you have a damage deck, which is a random deck. This one, for example, is radio damage. This tank has a 0 initiative, but it takes 0 damage and it's repairable. So you have all kinds of interesting damage effects. Engine damaged, you can only make 1 move per turn. You take 2 damage, but it's repairable. So you take your damage cards until you hit the hit points on your tank, and then your tank is toast. It's destroyed. We have the movement arrow. When we talk about the movement phase, we'll talk about this a little bit more. You have damage tokens, so he's taken 3 damage. You have a marker to tell you how many times a tank has moved. So, for example, this T-34 has a mobility of 3, so it can move up to 3 times in the movement phase. So basically, when you do that, you choose, if it were to move 3 times, you'd put a 3 next to it. If it moved 2 times, you'd put a 2, and so on. And it's just a reminder during the shooting phase as to the speed of that tank, so you don't have to commit it to memory, because the speed of the tank can affect shooting and defense. So that's important. You have an objective token, just a simple flag, and you have destroyed tokens, which, I don't know, I guess you could put it on the tank or on the card. I'm not sure where you'd want to put that. You also have unit markers, so that you can mark your tanks. If you have multiples of the same tank, you might want to have number 1 tank, number 2 tank. Same thing X-Wing does, actually. Then you have the terrain over there, which is all flat cardboard terrain. Suppose you could replace it with 3-dimensional terrain, but this game is kind of designed to use the flat terrain and have the players alternate back and forth putting the terrain out. Again, similar to how X-Wing does their asteroids and obstacle placement. Alright, so that's a discussion of the contents. Next up, let's talk about the turn sequence. The turn sequence is made up of 3 phases. The first phase is the movement phase, then you have the shooting phase, then you have the command phase. So the movement phase is pretty simple, so we're just talking about that real quick. Basically what you do is you start with the tank with the lowest initiative, and you proceed up through the initiative order to the tanks with the highest initiative. So basically, in our example here, we've got a T-34 and a Panzer IV. The T-34 has an initiative of 6. The Panzer IV has an initiative of 5. So that means at the start of the turn, the movement phase, I should say, the Panzer IV is going to have to move first. Moving first is not necessarily an advantage, and in most cases, it's a disadvantage. If you are a lower initiative, you have to move first, so your opponent is always going to be able to react to your move. So if you move up towards an enemy, they have the option of if they're going to meet you or they're going to go hide, and so on. So having a lower initiative is not necessarily a good thing. So in this case, the German player, the Panzer IV, would move first, and then the T-34 would move. the way that you move is you look at the mobility. So let's get some of these things out of the way here. Let's say it's our T-34's turn to move. It has a mobility of 3. Now this is a movement arrow. And the way that this works is you can make up to 3 movements. You can use this up to 3 times. A movement is placing the arrow in contact with the tank and then moving the tank anywhere within the arrow. So not on the outside of the arrow, but on the inside of the arrow. So I could move my tank here. 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 So anywhere, as long as it's touching that arrow, but it's behind the front part of the arrow. So no here, for example. The simple rule is as long as the tank is flush to these long sides of the arrow, your movement is good. So that's, again, flush, flush. So with this movement arrow, you can really have your tank positioned almost any way you want. You know, I could put my movement arrow that way and move my tank there. Now that would count as one movement, and then I could do that again for my second movement, and I could do that again for my third movement, and so on. So once I've performed my moves, I place a movement token next to my tank, so I know that this tank has moved 3 times. So that's how simple movement is in the game. Now, as far as obstacles go, well, obstacles are pretty simple. You have solid obstacles like a building, right? And with a building, you can put your arrow through the building, but your tank can't go through the building, right? So if you put your movement arrow there, let's say he starts there, you put your movement arrow there, really he's just moving, he could move there, but that's about it. So you could do that. There are also walls, and that's these long guys here. If you go over a wall, the wall is removed from the game. The last kind of distinct type of terrain are the woods, and the woods you can move through normally. They really don't impact movement in the game. It's more kind of obscuring and making shooting harder. So again, movement is very, very simple in the game. You're playing with the arrow, and with that arrow you can really position that tank almost anywhere you want. It's very easy to maneuver your tank. Okay. So that keeps the game simple and makes movement kind of fun. Okay. All right, so now we go to the shooting phase. Basically, the shooting phase, initiative-wise, is the opposite of the movement phase. So the higher initiative tank is going to get to fire first. So if you have a higher initiative, you move last, you shoot first. So very, very simple rule there. Move last, shoot first. Now let's look at an example. Let's imagine our Panzer IV is staying put, and we have this T-34 only moved once. So our Panzer IV is going to shoot. It's got 4 firepower, so it's going to get 4 dice. So each one of those, we managed to get 1 hit. However, when a tank is stationary in this game, we can re-roll our misses. That's looking a little bit better there. So we got a critical and 2 hits. So that's our attack pool done. Over here for the T-34, we have a survivability of 1. So that's going to get us 1 die for our defense roll. And the T-34 moved at a speed of 1, so that's going to get me another defense die. But the Panzer IV stayed put, so we're not going to get any more defense dice out of that. If we were behind a wall, we would gain a further defense die. Alright, so let's say that happens. We're going to go ahead and roll, and we only got one success. So now the shooting player can decide which result this cancels. They're obviously going to say it cancels this one, so those are gone. So we're left with 2 hits. The first hit just does a damage point. The second hit, sorry, the critical hit draws a card. So we drew crew injured. It does 2 damage. Target player discards 1 crew card of their choice from this tank. So we would take that, place it here, and now we are up to 3 damage on our tank. And as a terrain note, this wall would be destroyed as part of that attack. Walls don't last long in these games of World of Tanks. So that gives you an idea of how combat works. The combat basic mechanic is very simple. It's just a attack pool, and you subtract your defense successes from that. The depth comes in with your upgrade cards, how you can upgrade it. And that's going to make this game a lot more interesting for a lot of players. So you can, part of the fun is figuring out what combos you might want to put on your tank to maximize the number of rerolls you get and things like that. Also, there's a lot of upgrade cards that increase your initiative. So for example, if the Panzer IV had one of the things we talked about earlier, like enhanced gun laying drive, if you guys can see that there, when stationary or while having a movement token of 1, this tank gains +2 initiative in the shooting phase. So by equipping your Panzer IV with that enhanced gun laying drive, during the shooting phase, my initiative is now a 7 instead of a 5. And by using cards like these, you can impact how the game is played. So in this case, during the shooting phase, the Panzer IV is going to fire first before the T-34. Whereas if this card was not assigned to that tank, your T-34 would fire first. So you can see the importance of that and how you want to spend your points. Again, very much like X-Wing with the pilot skill, and how cards and things like that can affect what you do. All right, so that's the shooting phase in a nutshell. Now there are some other more advanced rules as far as terrain interaction and stuff like that. We're not going to go over that. Just realize that those rules are common sense rules. If you're in the woods, you're harder to hit. If you're obscured behind a building, you're harder to hit. If you're all the way behind a building, you can't be seen, and so on. So those are pretty easy, but again, we're not going to go over those. We're just going over the bare bone basics to get an idea of how this game plays. All right, so then after the shooting phase is done, you do the command phase. So you check for victory. Basically, if all your opponent's tanks are destroyed, you win. Or maybe a scenario has a mission objective that you've completed. And then you can, so if no one wins, then you can try to repair your tank. Each tank can try to make 1 repair. And basically you just roll a die, and if you get any kind of result that's not a blank, so a hit or a critical, you can repair something that's repairable. So if if he had that turret jammed, I could try to repair it, and it's not repaired, so I'd go into the next turn with my turret still jammed. Then you roll to determine who has advantage, and then you remove all movement tokens and put the discard cards back. Anything that's discarded you would put back into the damage deck. And I should mention a little bit more about advantage. Advantage at the start of the game, you roll off, and at the start of every turn, or the end of every turn, you roll off to see which player has advantage. Why is advantage important? Well, if you have tanks that have the same initiative value, the player who has advantage gets to choose whether they're going to move first or second. Okay, folks, so there you go. That's a super fast introduction to the rules of tanks. And again, this is not a comprehensive how to play or rules to play. This is more to kind of show you what you can expect out of this game and some of the basic concepts in how the game is played. Again, it's a fairly simple game as far as the mechanics go, but that is a good thing. It means these games are done quick. You can play more. You can have more tanks on your side, and you know, it gives you a fast pace. The depth comes in the crew cards and the upgrade cards you can add to your tanks. Building the perfect squad. I think that's going to be an interesting play. And again, back to the X-Wing analogy, this can be a boon and a curse with these cards. I used to play X-Wing quite a lot. Jake and I were both heavily into it. Him more so than me, but that's a different story. And I have a huge collection, but I lost interest over time when the game became more and more about the cards. I liked the game when it was more about the maneuvering, and, you know, the maneuvering and skill of the individual pilots and vehicles. When you started to have these incredibly crazy combos, and that's what everyone was farming, the game lost interest. It became more of a card game with miniatures instead of a miniatures game with cool cards. Right now, this game is cool. It's in that state where the upgrades, none of the upgrades seem incredibly broken to me. I'm sure there's combos that can be teased out of here, but I haven't seen any yet that seem game breaking. And so you're in that fun spot where you can add these upgrades, and it just feels like you're adding a legitimate upgrade to a tank. And that makes it fun. Down the road, though, you know, Gale Force 9 needs to be careful not to turn it into, you know, I need to buy this expansion to get that one upgrade card, which unlocks all of these, you know, combos that are just going to kind of kill the immersion of the game. So I hope Gale Force 9 doesn't go down that route. I've got my fingers crossed, because as it is right now, it's a fun, simple game that has some depth to it if you want to play it that way. So there you go, guys. That's a look at the World of Tanks miniatures game rules overview. If you like this, please let me know down in the comments below. Have you played it? What are your thoughts? Do they differ from mine on this game? Also, please do check us out on Facebook at All Miniatures Great and Small. You can see what we're up to there and interact with us. We always love the content. We do appreciate a like and subscribe here on YouTube. Also, click that bell to receive notification when we release new content. And if you enjoy our Flames of War coverage, you can check out our Flames of War Patreon. Patrons get access to a Flames of War battle report every month that's exclusive to them. As always, though, thanks for watching, and keep on wargaming.